Hello, comrades! Welcome back to the Liberation Hour, brought to you by the Red Phoenix and WRFU. Welcome back, comrades! It's so good to be here on the Liberation Hour once again. Yes, it is November 5th, 2025, and yes, we are back once again for another lovely episode here tonight on a wonderful fall night. Yes, it's finally getting cold, guys. I love it. I'm a huge fall girly myself. But before we get into the news for today, we have the top of the hour disclaimer as per usual. WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign online community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU UCIMC. Folks, welcome back. Yes, we are here on the Liberation Hour. We're here to discuss the news of the week. And I only have really one story that I want to talk about today, and that is the elections. Folks, ZOHRAN MAMDANI is now the mayor-elect of New York City. Let's go. All right. As many of you may know, I am not a reformist myself. However, I do still see the massive, massive win that this is for the working class, folks. This is huge. All right. Whether we want to admit it or not, this is huge for the working class of New York, and this is huge for working class people nationwide. Not because this person was running on a Democratic ticket. No, not. In fact, not at all. I will actually be discussing this more in depth in my discussion with Comrade Red on the second part of today's segment on the government shutdown. However, more broadly, I think it's important to realize something so incredibly profound about this win, which is that ZOHRAN MAMDANI, whether we want to admit it or not, represents and what his campaign has represented is working class solidarity, that there is hope, there is change, and that there is no popular mandate that the Trump administration has on this country. We, the working class of the United States of America and beyond, have proven once again here, over there in the city of New York, not here, we are in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. But those comrades of New York, those who came out in droves in support of ZOHRAN MAMDANI's campaign, did not come out in support necessarily just for the man ZOHRAN MAMDANI. Not the man, no, for the policy, for what his policy represents for working class New Yorkers, for what the working class solidarity can look like and what it should be. Understand this. We will take what we can get. And right now what we have earned is a mayor, the likes of ZOHRAN MAMDANI. He is going to enact policy which will benefit the working class of New York so much. And we must recognize this, and we must be amicable to this, and we must realize that while there is so much work to be done, don't get me wrong, there is so much work to be done. We must celebrate in this victory. ZOHRAN MAMDANI and his campaign and what he has done and what he has, what the ZOHRAN campaign has given us is a fresh new look at how we, as the working class of the United States, can move forward. Once again, the Democratic Party is a bourgeois party first and foremost. We must not rally behind the man, but behind the movement. This isn't about ZOHRAN as a person. We don't actually know ZOHRAN as a person, and we cannot allow ourselves to fall into this idea that we'll somehow find liberation in a singular person and a singular figure. Instead, we must understand that this is a movement, that this is symptomatic of a larger movement within working class solidarity. That people can organize, they can come together for a larger, bigger, broader movement. And that movement, folks, that movement is the move towards socialism. Whether you like it or not, we're going to be there one day. One day within our lifetimes, we will reach socialism in this country. And what does that mean? That doesn't necessarily mean backing candidates like ZOHRAN MAMDANI. That means backing policies which are good for working people. That means backing movements and backing ideologies and theory which is meant for working people by working people. Understanding the structures and the larger picture here, but also the bedwork and the actual the framing here, and that is Marxism-Leninism. That is understanding, what is capitalism? What is the bourgeois state? What is the bourgeois class? And the bourgeois class, folks, is represented within the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not here to stay. They are not here for working people. They have always been a bourgeois party. And while the win of ZOHRAN MAMDANI is huge, and I should say this is not endorsing any specific candidate here on WRFU. We are not endorsing any specific candidate. We are simply endorsing the policies, or not necessarily endorsing the policies, but we are looking at how these policies are good for working people. And I think that one of the biggest and most important parts of what this campaign represents is that working people are ready to move forward. We are, sorry, I was just hitting the table there for those who are listening live. We as the working class are ready to move towards better. The Trump regime and everything and all of the fascist policies and the fascist rhetoric which they use is not the end-all be-all of American working class solidarity. We can do better, and we have done better. There have been working class movements here in America which have been very robust, which have been amazing for the people, for the proletariat. And we can reinvigorate those, and we can move forward, and we can find better, and we deserve better. And as you can tell, I'm very excited about this because this is an exciting time. It's time for the working people of the United States to realize that we deserve better. That yeah, we should have single-payer healthcare in this country. That yeah, we do deserve things like fast and free buses. But socialism is not when fast and free buses. This is a specific policy. Socialism is when we dismantle the bourgeois class and we install the dictatorship of the proletariat. And what does that mean exactly? This means the working people, the people who make this world go round, the people who go to work every single day, who not necessarily even go to work, but are part of society. We are the ones who run this country, not the bourgeois class who hoards all of the wealth and resources and forces us to fight each other for scraps. No. This is not the way. We must work towards a world in which working people are there for each other, in which socialism is built for all. Socialism is about the collective. It is not about the individual. And that does not necessarily mean that there is an individual, that there is no individual liberation within this movement. It means that there cannot be individual liberation while the collective is fighting each other for scraps and for crumbs, and is beaten down by the bourgeois class, which only aims to divide us further. We find individual liberation with the collective. We are not just one person, but we are the people. This is the people. This is a working people's movement. Understand this, folks. This is only the beginning. The ZOHRAN MAMDANI campaign is only the beginning. And I want everyone to rejoice in this win, because this is huge. Reform is not reform and revisionism are not the way forward, but we can see and we can look at the tangible benefits that reform do for us. That reform has its place in building revolutionary optimism, and I want viewers and listeners to know that while I have heavy critique, and while I know that, and while we must know that this is not the end, and that we cannot vote ourselves out of this oppressive system, that we can rejoice in the little wins along the way, and that we can find solace in the fact that this is going to benefit working class Americans across the board in New York, and that this populist rhetoric, while we have heavy critique and we should have heavy critique, is working, and working people want better, and they're fighting for it. ZOHRAN MAMDANI won by a huge margin in comparison to Andrew Cuomo. That's a big deal. It's showing that that what the Democrats have been pushing for years now, we're better than Trump, so you might as well vote for us. It's not working, and it never has. You need to do more. It's not just, well, we're not Trump. It is, we are going to fight for better, and understand that the Democrats will never actually do that for us, because the Democrats are a bourgeois class and a bourgeois party, and they represent the bourgeois class. However, we can see that with campaigns like ZOHRAN MAMDANI's campaign, there is so much to be learned, and the Democrats will never truly allow a ZOHRAN MAMDANI to flourish within their party, but we can still recognize the win that it is for him to be mayor of New York. I mean, he can deliver on so many things, and he's going to have to fight a lot, and there's going to be problems. And we go into this more during the segment with Comrade Red in about 20 minutes, but that's really what I wanted to touch on today. And kind of, in that vein, I also wanted to talk about candidates which you shouldn't really back, because these candidates are not actually there for working people, and that would be candidates like Graham Platner of Maine. I can understand how folks might feel considering, oh, sorry, there's a hair on the mic, and I'm not loving it. Okay, anyway. I think that a Graham Platner, and for those who are listening, who may be listening, who may have listened to, who for the 3 viewers who may or may not be Hasanabi heads, I have a huge disagreement here with our boy Hassan, who happens to be one of the biggest leftist political content creators and political representatives for the left online and in real life. This is a huge disagreement I have with him. For those who don't know who Hassan Piker is, congratulations, you're not terminally online. What I'm saying here is people like Graham Platner, who is, for those who don't know, he is running for the Senate position in Maine, for one of the Senate seats in Maine. He is currently trying to beat out the incumbent, I want to say. I don't know a ton about the seat itself, but I do know that he is currently running on the populist campaign of fighting the oligarchy, being anti-Israel, basically a lot of like the Bernie and the AOC line. But even then, it's a little bit convoluted, but regardless, he's running more on this campaign of populist rhetoric, as we have seen in the past. Part of the reason I'm so harsh in criticizing Graham Platner specifically, and I do talk about him a little bit as well in the segment coming up, is because Graham Platner is an imperialist. And if you don't know, so as I said, he is currently running for one of the Senate seats in Maine, and he's an oyster farmer, but he also did 3 tours in Iraq as a Marine, and he worked for Blackwater. He also had a Nazi Totenkopf tattoo on his chest for about 20 years. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. First and foremost, I would like to say I'm the child of veterans. I do not hate veterans. I do not believe that veterans are evil, and I do not believe that people who were in the military cannot change for the better and realize the problems and the extreme issues with American imperialism. I believe that anyone can change. There's this hair on the mic, and it's really okay. I believe that veterans and people can change. They can change their minds, they can change their hearts, and they can become better people than who they have been. This goes across the board for any person. If you don't believe fundamentally that human beings can change and change their minds and be better, you're not a Marxist. Point blank, you're just not a Marxist. However, I do still believe that there is a lot of room for critique here, and I'm going to explain why. So my biggest critique on Graham Platner is not necessarily his service in the U.S. military with the Marines. My biggest critique is that there has been no actual showing of growth or change within that, and this is coming from someone who literally grew up in the military. I am a staunch anti-imperialist, and I remain so. I do not believe that I believe fundamentally that the American military is an evil institution. But I don't believe that the people who join are necessarily evil people. I think that, we can understand that here in the United States, the American military is more than anything a jobs program, especially for those who are the poorest. People outside of the United States might not totally understand that because they don't really understand what it is like to be an American. Many people, my own parents included, joined the military because they were poor, and it was the only opportunity out of their small town or out of debt or whatever it may have been that was holding them in one place in poverty. For some people, it is the only way out, and it is a huge price to pay because it is very deceiving. It is a very deceiving institution. It makes you think, as an American who has frankly been brainwashed to believe that the American military is some force for good, that it'll give you the upward mobility necessary to fight to have better in your life. For many veterans, this is not the case. Many of them end up getting out with disabilities, with jobs that are not applicable to the outside world, and with more problems than they did going in. That being PTSD, especially if they were combat veterans, and just generally not having any access beyond that. And again, it's a very deceiving institution because it makes you think that, oh well, I'm going to have upward mobility after I get out because I'll have skills, and I'll have I'll have a retirement if I stay in for long enough, and XYZ, and it's one of those things that you can understand why someone would join, especially in the conditions in which they are living. Graham Platner is not this kind of person. Graham Platner grew up in a petite bourgeois family. He had plenty of means to not have to go join the military. He did it specifically, as he has stated before, in now deleted Reddit posts, but also out in the open as well, that he wanted to go and kill people. You might say, well, comrade, maybe he changed his mind. And I would say, if someone is willing to change their mind from that position, that's amazing, and we should harness that. But this is not the case with Graham Platner. No. He, even after doing 3 tours in Iraq, being responsible for killing who knows how many people, Iraqi people, many of which were most likely civilians, and also having been a prison guard at one of the most notorious prisons during that time in Fallujah, I believe, and also having been a Blackwater mercenary in Afghanistan, and having a Nazi totenkopf tattoo, there's a lot. There's a lot there. It would take a lot to repent from that, honestly, and I still believe that people can change even with that experience. Even with those experiences, people can change, but this is not the case. Once again, Graham Platner came from a petite bourgeois family. Going and joining Blackwater because he, quote unquote, didn't have any other skills is not an option, and that is I find that completely reprehensible. I could understand if it was someone who came from deep poverty, who had no other choice, but there were other choices. This was a specific decision made on the part of someone who enjoyed doing imperialism for the United States and still believes in it now. If you look at his policies and how he actually still feels about the American military, he is still very much a supporter of American imperialism. He wants to give more money to the military. He wants to do more imperialism, actually. He wants to, quote unquote, make conditions better for veterans. Okay, or better for active duty military and those in the military. Well, the military already has plenty of money. There's no need to add more to the bank account just because this is about an allocation of resources. And understand there is a class analysis here, guys. As it relates to the conditions of our troops, of the troops in the United States military, understand that there is still a class dynamic there. That, of course, as it relates to living conditions for the Americans that are currently in active duty service or otherwise, yeah, of course their conditions aren't good because it's a capitalist economy, because this is capitalism. Yeah, I mean, do they have health care? Yes. Are there meals provided for them? Yes. There are aspects of quote unquote socialism, but it's not socialism. and I can understand wanting people to have better working conditions, but that does not mean giving more money to the American military, nor does it mean continuing to uphold the institution itself, because the institution uses and abuses the people that choose to join because it can, and it never will stop, because that is imperialism at its core. It is the highest stage of capitalism. No, those who are currently serving are not going to have better living conditions, even if you try to fight for it in the Senate, because at the end of the day, this is about contracts, military contracts with those who create weapons and who manufacture them, because this is a war economy, and I find it very hard to believe that someone of Graham Platner's background is actually against the oligarchy. He's using this very populist rhetoric because it's popular, because people like it. But don't be fooled. Do not be fooled. There are veterans and people who have changed for the better and who have seen the harm and the deep issues with this institution, and not only see those problems, but also understand that that needs to stop. That at its fundamental core, that the American military, yes, is an evil institution, and it needs to be dismantled because it not only murders and maims and takes over entire countries and kills civilians and does all of these terrible things to countries that you can't even pronounce the name of, but it also it does the same thing to its own people, its own troops, its own, because this is the institution. Again, capitalism, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. There is inherent there is inherent exploitation within this system, because if a person, if their only way out is to sell their body to the imperialist power in order to have any sense, any ability to have an education, to have a job, to have an income, to have health care, to have housing, that is an inherently unbalanced and exploitative relationship, and it needs to be dismantled entirely. Entirely. And this is why I continue to advocate for revolution, because this will benefit everyone across the board. Being forced to join the murderous institution of the United States military, that is not liberation. And giving them more funding to quote unquote take care of the troops isn't liberation either. No, this is only perpetuating the cycle. This is only perpetuating capitalism. Capitalism itself must be dismantled if we are going to find true liberation for all working people, and this includes those who are in the American military. I support our troops in abandoning their posts and pursuing Marxist-Leninist revolution. That is how I support our troops. And getting vulnerable for a second, yes, this is a hard conversation for me to have. This is a hard situation for me because I love my family. I do. You know, mom and dad, if you're watching, I love you. You know, these people are important to me, and we do have fundamental disagreements on this, and it is rough. But I believe what I believe, and I understand that no one should have to sell their body to pay off their debt, to have access to an outside world beyond their small town. You know, my parents came from poor families who didn't have a lot of means to send them to send them off into a world in which they would have opportunity. You know, my dad worked 3 jobs in college, and he came out with massive amounts of debt. My mom grew up in a family of 5, and there was no money to send her to college. These were their options. Criticize as you may, and I think that criticism, once again, is a good thing. But understanding the people's material conditions and why they do what they do will always give you a better understanding than criticism for criticism's sake. I have fundamental disagreements with my parents on the institution of the American military. But what I understand wholeheartedly, and I continue to support, is revolution for the sake of all working Americans, and understanding that we cannot abandon our comrades who are currently serving in the American military, who are dealing with the problems that brings about for them, and tell them, oh well, you're just a baby murderer, so screw you. No, these are people who are ripe for radicalization, who understand fundamentally the problems, especially those who have been forced into combat in order to have a life beyond the poor life in which they have been given in the United States under rampant capitalism. We must still extend empathy, and we must also hold by our principles. And it is why I believe that people like Graham Platner are not the answer. Because if they are still going to uphold American imperialism, they are still upholding capitalism, and that is the fundamental problem here. And it is why we cannot support people like him. But we can support better, and we can support troops who choose when they get out to become radicalized and become Marxist-Leninist or some kind of socialist, and understanding that the system itself is the problem. It is the system, and the people are susceptible to the system, and we must extend empathy while also holding by our principles. It is why I can hold the relationships that I do, because I love my family, but I also love my movement, and I love socialism, and I understand that this can be better for everyone. And it is why we cannot support people who are seeking to be representatives like Graham Platner and those who are within that ideology, because they do not actually believe in better. Just because they use the word oligarchy and they're endorsed by Bernie Sanders and AOC doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I recognize that it can be hard for some listeners or viewers to hear this, because it's like, well, if we can't endorse this person, then what? Why are we being so nitpicky? The reason I say this, and we're about to start the segment with Comrade Red, but I do want to address this. The reason that I make this argument is because I don't want us to fall into the idea of American exceptionalism and thinking that our imperialism is fine. It's just other people's imperialism. No. Understand this. Um, as much as I love my family, I do still have to recognize that the imperialist machine is inherently evil. And it's incredibly sad that people have given over their lives and everything to fight for it, believing that it was right. Um, and when you get there and you see the reality of what imperialism is and what it does, that right there, that is a radicalizing moment for so many people. And we can harness that, but we cannot harness someone who is still willing to support the imperial system and the imperial core, because it's too hard to do anything else. We can build a better movement. We can build a socialist movement in which we completely reject imperialism of all stripes, the imperial order, completely, and we search for better. And we have found it. We have found it in the movement of socialism. The troops are not exempt from this. And I'll say this again, I'll say this about cops. I'll say it. People can change their minds. We will not change our principles, but people can change their minds. And it's hard to hear that, but understand, someone can serve in the police force and realize it was wrong, and realize that they have changed their mind, and understanding that the police force is inherently an oppressive system that must be, community control of the police, as we talked about in the last episode. So there is a way forward. People can change their minds, they can change their hearts, and they can move on, and they can find better movements and better ideologies, which are about the liberation of all people. And it's why I think, and we should not alienate any of these folks from what is right, and alienate them from the movement, because they are just as much as part of this society as we are, and trying to draw differential lines and saying, oh, well, you served in the military or you were a police officer, so there's no way that you could have been radicalized and changed your mind. Absolutely they can. Absolutely they can change their minds. This is absolutely true. Once again, folks like Graham Platner are not the answer, but there is different, there is better. There are plenty of service people out there who remain unnamed, who have absolutely changed their minds and changed their hearts and moved towards socialism and abandoned the imperial order as what is right, and have chosen to join in the fight and the movement towards a better future for all working people, for the proletariat, not only on the national scale here in the United States, but the international scale. And so, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play you guys the first 30 minutes of my conversation with Comrade Red on the government shutdown. We talk about a lot of what I just talked about in this segment, a little more in depth, with a little more with a I would say obviously another input, because we have Comrade Red. But yes, this is the first 30 minutes of my segment with Comrade Red, and you can also find the rest of it. It should be posted either tonight or tomorrow on my YouTube channel at Comrade Felicity or Communist Bananas. I would love to hear from you guys in the comments about how you think the show is going. And yeah, this is my segment with Comrade Red on the government shutdown. Okay, so welcome back to the show, Comrade Red. It is so good to have you back here. Today, we are going to be discussing the government shutdown, the ins and outs of what's going on, and giving a much more, I would say, like a Marxist analysis to the situation, understanding where we're at, why exactly this is happening, and what do we do moving forward exactly. A lot of people are being affected by this government shutdown. But also, I think there's a lot of analysis that we can do here around parties such as the Democratic Party, which tend to cosplay as this, not necessarily more radical, but definitely in opposition to the Republican Party, which they have proven time and time again that they are not, especially with their policy initiatives surrounding things like
like immigration and border enforcement and the economy. As we know, the Democratic Party is simply another bourgeois party. They simply are not better at hiding it. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party both have very similar end goals. And this government shutdown, as we'll see as we do further analysis, really is kind of really showing, I guess, that situation, and also just how far the Democratic Party has fallen, or were they ever there for the working people? So anyway, Comrade Red, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Felicity. It's good to be here. Yeah, as many know, I'm Comrade Red from the Mid-Atlantic region of the American Party of Labor. And yeah, I'm very excited to kind of get into the weeds of this very contentious and universal issue because it really does impact all of us. You know, even for Americans that say don't receive SNAP benefits or aren't federal workers who are being furloughed or forced to take unpaid time off. These are services that are being denied the average American. You know, it further pushes back benefits that we could need in the future or that we may need already, and it's putting it even further out of the reach of more millions of Americans who may need them. And we're going to do our best to go in depth as much as possible, I hope. And what we really hope to accomplish with this is to kind of show that the Democrats absolutely cannot save us, and it is foolhardy for us to hope that they do. And like generally, to build up this belief that if reform could have resolved capitalism, would have happened centuries ago, then that indeed revolution is the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously agree. And I think it might be useful to maybe some new listeners or listeners who are unfamiliar with the terminology that we use to kind of describe what we mean when we say that the Democratic Party is a bourgeois party. Um, because I think that it's important for us to really have a strong ethos and understanding of when I say the Democratic Party is a bourgeois party, what does that exactly mean? I'll kind of start it off, and then Comrade Red, you could definitely jump in with extra or more in-depth analysis of this. But when I think of the Democratic Party as a bourgeois party, I would characterize that as a party that fights for and maintains the rights and privileges of the bourgeois class, which is directly in opposition to the needs and the wants of the proletariat. They are looking to exploit us for as much labor as possible, for as little pay as possible, as little benefits. And we can see this with how our country does not have does not have things like a universal single payer health care. We do not have a solid minimum wage. We don't have a guaranteed housing. This is all in the interest of bourgeois profits and ensuring that every single part of our lives is on a subscription plan, a payment plan, and is always needs to be bought and paid for in some way, shape, or form. Human rights don't really exist to the bourgeois class. And the Democratic Party, as well as the Republican Party, work directly in the interest of this class of people. Do you think that is sufficient, Comrade?
Yes, I would. I would say it is because if we really understand that, in general, this is a state, like every administration is going to be a government that is bought and paid for by the capitalist class, then both quote unquote parties are going to be representatives of different sections of the ruling class or of different tactics at different times that serve the interests of the broader capitalist class. But at the end of the day, these are simply factions that are in many senses they're choreographing like some sort of staged opposition in this fantastical way to give in many senses not only playing out a real division between individual capitalists, but establishing and maintaining this illusion for working people that there is a genuine struggle and that your vote matters, that every vote matters, that we have a real democracy, and God bless America and our American exceptionalism. And all of this will serve to coddle and to distract and to comfort working people when we are losing clean air and clean water, losing jobs, losing incomes, taxes remain regressive, we're losing our homes, education is further out of our reach, even vaccinations are being curtailed in their availability. So capitalism is a direct threat to our health and our very lives, and it wouldn't be acceptable if it were just a threat to our prosperity and to our genuine democracy, and it is. But it is an existential threat that both the Democrats and the Republicans are advancing with every administration, every Congress, every day.
Absolutely. I think that to kind of characterize this more with some of our representatives, I think a lot of more left-leaning liberals tend to reference folks like the Squad, who are in Congress, specifically in the House. It's made up of Rashida Tlaib, AOC, Al Green, Ilhan Omar, and I could be missing a couple others, but these people and folks who are currently running for the Senate in Maine, I think of Graham Platner. These people are characterized as being the more left quote unquote leftist Democrats, but we forget one important thing, which is that most of these representatives actively support and uphold American imperialism, which is completely unacceptable. AOC being a big one as well. She in this argument about American imperialism, she has very much upheld Israel's right to exist for many months. She's only recently, more recently into the genocide of the Palestinian people, actually been willing to admit that not only is it a genocide, but Israel is a genocidal state. I mean, even then, she really flip flops on that. She's very unreliable. Graham Platner, as I mentioned, is a man who did 3 tours in Iraq and also was employed by Blackwater and had a Nazi totenkopf tattoo on his chest. And he's currently running on a populist campaign of fighting the oligarchy while also openly supporting American imperialist interests and funding the military even more than it already is. But people are upholding him for some reason as some kind of bastion of leftist politics who can bring socialist ideas to the Senate when this is the furthest thing from the truth. So when we talk about the Democrats as a bourgeois class, I am also including folks like the Squad and other more progressive people like Graham Platner and even Bernie Sanders to a large extent. Still uphold American exceptionalism, American imperialism, and do not actually oppose capitalism in any meaningful sense.
Well, yeah, I know that we're on the eve of the New York mayoral election right now, and I promise that we will get into the government shutdown. And I think that this rain check from our federal government, this incredibly, obscenely expensive, obscenely elaborate and bureaucratic, useless body of governance that very rarely accomplishes anything meaningful for the average American. Almost never, I would say. I think that heightens the interest around the election going on in New York. There's a big buzz with Trump and Elon Musk endorsing Andrew Cuomo, and that weirdo Curtis Sliwa has no chance of winning.
And yet people are still
But
weirdly obsessed with him. I'm going to point it out.
yeah,
Like, y'all need to stop. You need to stop. He's not baby
I'm
girl. He's
I
not.
mean, I live in a post-industrial town, and I think that we very much have our local folk heroes who walk around with boom boxes and wear, rather, fabulous clothing, and they're very loud and boisterous. I think Curtis Lewa is very much that for New York, just like a cryptid of sorts, um, an urban cryptid, but.
Oh, definitely.
Like if we're talking about the Squad, and you could say Zohran Mamdani is not a member of the Squad. He's not even on the same level of governance. Uh, he is as a Democratic candidate for the mayoralty of New York. Also been exposed. He's walked back statements about the Intifada, which you could criticize. You can get into the weeds of like a global Intifada against, imperialism. But it's that same kind of inevitable de-radicalization that the Democratic Party is going to impose on even its most diverse and its most radical and its most progressive candidates. Like was Zohran
Absolutely.
Mamdani also admitting that Israel, a genocidal colonialist state, has a right to defend itself, has a right to exist when it is the aggressor, when it exists parasitically on the backs and on the destruction of the Palestinian and other nations.
Yeah,
So while yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, well, I
uh,
mean, sorry, just to piggyback off of what you're saying, which is why
mhm, yeah,
we need to continue to be, I just making a comment on that Mamdani comment because I think it's really important to emphasize this, especially on the eve of him possibly being elected as the New York mayor. We still need to hold his feet to the fire. I wrote an article about this, about Zohran Mamdani back in July. I still uphold everything I said in that article. Zohran Mamdani is not a socialist, but he is a step in the right direction. And we can look at the good that he is doing right now and the promises that he is making on a campaign that is, I think, actually pretty like I agree with almost everything he's saying, in terms of material, like giving material needs to New Yorkers. However, we cannot allow ourselves to fall into revisionism and to fall into the very empty promise of reform, which is what the Zohran Mamdani campaign is. While I think that in the short term, can these things be really achievable, and amazing for New Yorkers? Absolutely, but we cannot give in to reformist ideas and let go of our revolutionary optimism. But anyway, sorry, comrade, continue.
well, no, you're right. If Mamdani is successful in, establishing a good percentage of the things that he wants to accomplish, then yes, it would be very good for New Yorkers. Like we want working people to have the breathing room and the time off and the health and the safety to actually organize, to join unions, the
Absolutely.
accessibility of unions and political organizations, and to live to educate themselves and to be politically active and organized. So it's these things that we obviously do support. No Marxist-Leninist would oppose things like single payer healthcare in their totality, but we must use them as exposures in the sense that capitalism will always be hypocritical, it will always be deceptive, it will always never go far enough to undo the exploitation that is baked into capitalist politico economics.
Period.
And this is assuming that Mamdani is even successful because if he is elected, he will still have to fight the big business backed Democratic dominated city council of New York. And there will be all kinds of checks and balances from different borough presidents throughout New York City. And within the Democratic Party itself, and this is the real fruit of a Mamdani, is the exposures that it makes. If Donald Trump and Elon Musk are supporting a Democratic Party heirling, and he is an heirling, it's almost feudalistic. Like Andrew
Hmm.
Cuomo may not have been where he is without Mario Cuomo, who was also a governor of New York.
Hmm.
Um, but he wouldn't, and people like to talk about the Kim dynasty and the DPRK. What about the Cuomo dynasty? But that's enough of that.
Let's talk about that.
Um, um, but if Trump and Musk are gathering around a Democratic Party insider against the quote unquote communist Mamdani, and Democrats are going to walk step in lockstep with Trump and Musk around Cuomo, what could you call the Democrats but
Yeah,
a party of false opposition to Trumpism?
it is so
That
clear.
yes.
Yeah, no, I mean it's crazy and it's insane. And when we talk about this government shutdown and what exactly the Republicans and the Democrats are fighting each other about and why this is happening, when we also look at these elections, we have to remember that the Democrats and the Republicans are not diametrically opposing parties. They are not out here, they do not have opposition views on capital. Like Nancy Pelosi can be quoted very recently saying, "I'm sorry, but we're a capitalist party." Like that that is all the evidence at this point that you need to see that the Democrats, regardless of who they are running, not that they willingly wanted to run Mamdani because many of them did not. we still have to be very critical and understanding, and holding people like Mamdani's feet to the fire. I don't care how charismatic he is. We don't know him as a person, and this goes for all elected officials. We don't actually know these people. We are seeing an image of them. We are not seeing them. And in bourgeois elections, this is ever more true. We cannot sit here and say, oh well, he seems so nice, or he no. Putting all of that aside, putting his smile and all of these things that make him very appealing aside, what are the policies and what is he actually doing? These are the important steps, and this is exactly what we need to be holding the Democrats in Congress to as well when they do government shutdowns like this. What are they actually doing? Why are the Republicans doing this? And how is this hurting working families and working people?
Well, to piggyback off of that, because I do want to get into, and I know we do get into like the details of the shutdown. But if anything, I think the Democrats could really never be forgiven for is exhausting the revolutionary potential and the intelligence and the work ethic of so many diverse and excellent representatives that, like the squad has offered us. Like Bernie Sanders' parents escaped the Holocaust. And you could look at a lot of things that Bernie Sanders has said and Bernie Sanders has done that's admirable and speaks to good intentions by and large. And you could say the same for Ilhan Omar, who is the daughter of Somali refugees, and for AOC, who's a Puerto Rican woman and a working class herself, and to Cori Bush, who is a black woman from Missouri, where very recently it was the epicenter of the Black Lives Matter movement against the modern Jim Crow, against the colonialist police state that is the United States. And there's so much wasted potential. There's so much like potential for change that is wasted in the Democratic Party. It is wasting our AOCs and our Cori Bushes and our ZOHRAN Mamdanis and our Bernie Sanderses because it is a machine that chews up all human creativity, all human potential, all human intellect and analysis and class consciousness and spits out some kind of disgusting and misshapen capitalism that is what's the word I'm looking for? That is a caricature of inclusivity and equality and democracy. It is a lie, and it slanders and bemeans the very notion of equality and inclusivity and democracy and justice. Um, the Democratic Party is not a fallen angel. It's not a project that can be fixed. It is an insidious, sickness that consumes and transforms so much potential and hope and optimism in this country to serve the interests, both practically and ideologically, of capitalism in the United States. That's what I would say.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's important to understand that, like, the Democratic Party has been very effective in one thing, which is co-opting revolutionary potential, um, in order and wooing people into this idea of reform when they aren't even really for that. I have my own gripes with organizations like the DSA and the likes of them, but if there's one thing that we do agree on, and I guess more of like the leftist factions within the party, is that yeah, we do need to actively be moving away from capitalism, which is just not what the Democrats actually believe. And it's what they will never believe because, as we have established, they are a bourgeois party. And it is with people like the squad. We just need to remember this, especially when they say ignorant things about Israel. Looking at you, AOC and Bernie's in the Senate, but you get the vibes. It's like they have both still been very effective in the American imperialist machine. They are an American industrial complex. They are still vital organs in that system of destruction, and we can't act as though, well, because they have more leftist politics in comparison to the already very right wing Congress, that somehow they're the best we can do. That's just not true. It has never been true. Eugene Debs was alive in America. He was seen as like the American Bolshevik. You know, there is revolutionary potential in America. We don't have to just settle for this bullshit, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And uh, obviously here in the United States, we're not going to be educated about a lot of the revolutionary history. Like I always tell people, May Day is International Workers' Day. It's not Labor Day in the United States because we are a hyper-capitalist and reactionary society politically. Um, but May Day is International Workers' Day because of the Haymarket affair, because of striking workers in Chicago. Like the American working class and the struggle against sharecropping and the unionization that begot the corrupting concessions of the New Deal, who fought in the Spanish Civil War and fought enlisted to fight against fascism in the Second World War and the broader anti-war movements preceding and succeeding the Second World War. America has an excellent revolutionary history, and we're not going to learn about these things uh, from Democratic politicians and pundits and educators. It's simply not going to happen because, again, if people knew about the potential that exists within us and within our history, I think that we would be too galvanized to be stopped. And like if you look at the Democratic Party itself, it was founded by Andrew Jackson, who uh, was very much a proponent of this kind of Jeffersonian democracy, of this like little guy, has a couple of slaves, has a nuclear family, kicks some Native Americans off of their land, and carves out a space for themselves. It was really a party for the petty bourgeoisie in the United States. And once capitalism grows and develops, it is impossible to only represent the petty bourgeoisie. Different interests, industrial or financial or otherwise, have attached themselves to this very old and very successful wing of capitalism in the United States. And obviously we could see that with like carrying through to this day with Democrats who will get elected on the backs of a massive recession. You look at the 2008 recession and Obama was elected, or the Corona session in which Biden was elected, and they offer these sweeping stimulus bills. And yet, the vast majority of that funding will go towards major monopolies and bailing them out for their mistakes, for their fraud. And we will get pennies. And it will be insufficient for us to really recover from the consequences and the deceptions and the capriciousness of the capitalist class. And what this contributes, of course, to inflation, which raises our cost of living, while billionaires and millionaires, they're doing just fine, and they got a fair bit of money from that stimulus that makes them comfortable anyways. So fundamentally, you know, uh, for the sake of our survival and our prosperity, there's no democracy in this country, and the Democratic Party is an essential function of convincing and deceiving millions of Americans into believing that we do. We just have to vote harder. We just have to accept awful candidates, awful campaigns that are literal supporters of genocide, that make themselves indistinguishable from the Republicans, that do not champion even their own meager accomplishments for the working class for the sake of not chasing away landlords and the petty bourgeoisie who tend to vote Republican. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. And I think what it really speaks to is that conditions have deteriorated and exposed themselves so much in the United States that reform is almost insufficient in coddling and swaying people away. I think that and what we've seen with the No Kings and anti-ICE marches and so many demonstrations and the growing unionization movement is that people are looking for a solution. But I think for many, we're still wrestling with the breaking the illusion that reform is the solution. And I think that's why revolutionary organizations like the APL absolutely need to exist to provide that organizational alternative.
I absolutely agree. And I think kind of getting into the nitty gritty with this government shutdown and what exactly it means and why are the girls fighting? You know, like what is what's happening exactly? So from what I understand, and I've been as some viewers or listeners may know, I work full time and I am in school, so my ability to do in-depth research on these things is quite hindered, but I still do my best. But from what I understand about what's going on right now, is basically a government shutdown basically just means, for those who don't know, which I'm pretty sure everybody probably knows, it's essentially when the Democrats and Republicans in this case cannot agree on a budget bill and they cannot pass it. And so the previous federal budget expired. And so now the government is in shutdown as they try to negotiate a budget. And currently, the Democrats, according to the BBC, which grain of salt, heavy grain of salt, this is a bourgeois Western news media outlet, which is why we are doing this analysis to give it a Marxist analysis. But the BBC says Democrats want the bill to include an extension of expiring tax credits that make health insurance cheaper for millions of Americans and a reversal of Trump's cuts to Medicaid, a government health care program used by millions of elderly, disabled, and low-income people. Democrats also oppose spending cuts to government health agencies. And a stopgap bill designed to avoid the shutdown was passed in the House or lower chamber, but did not clear the Senate. And this was shot down by the GOP. But do not be deceived. The Democrats, if this is the best they can do, this is piss poor, frankly. And the reason I say that is because if you can't even actually fight for example, single payer health care, and you could only fight for the very, very flawed Obamacare program, then this is showing a fundamental problem with the Democratic Party, where they fight for the bare minimum for working people. This is the bare minimum. This is not actually this isn't anything. I would say, I mean, it's useful to working people because it gives us something at least, but it's never enough because they once again are a bourgeois party. What is your read on this, comrade?
Well, yeah. If let's look at healthcare for just an instance. If the Democrats are trying to reverse the cuts to Medicaid, that's all well and good. Unfortunately, Medicaid benefits were not properly but funded before Trump got into office, when Biden was and Harris were in office for 4 years. And Democrats love to bury their heads in the sand and run about Republican obstructionism. There is no democratic initiative. If there's no initiative, what can obstruct them? The Democrats have had 2 years in the midst of a great crisis to really show any meaningful potential to even paste over some of the worst exploitation and the millions of lives that were affected by COVID and the Corona session. And they didn't seize that opportunity. They campaigned off of a $2,000 stimulus, and they gave us a $1,200 stimulus. They campaigned off a $15 federal minimum wage, and Kamala Harris, being the tiebreaker vote, did not pass her vote that would have passed, given her vote to that bill that would have passed, clearing the way for a gradual $15 federal minimum wage, which in itself is grossly insufficient. But returning to healthcare and how insufficient Medicaid would be even if Trump's barbarous cuts were reversed, Obamacare is the right-wing healthcare plan. It was the plan advanced by Newt Gingrich during the H.W. Bush administration in the early 90s and during the early years of the Clinton administration, because some Democrats in the 90s were talking about single-payer healthcare. And Newt Gingrich's proposal was a market-based solution that would basically give an opting out mandate for employers to provide their workers um, subscriptions to healthcare providers with deductions taken out of their paychecks to fund their subscriptions. And basically, if in the course of the subscriptions too much was paid into it, you would get a tax credit for, all the income that was, overly withdrawn. Um, Now, the tax credits that Trump is cutting, these are an extension. There was a welfare cliff. We always say in the APL that too many Americans are too rich to escape poverty. Welfare is very inapplicable to millions and millions of Americans who cannot who are not eligible for SNAP and for Section 8 housing and for subsidized public transportation and for Medicaid and so on. But um what the Biden relief plan and what the Inflation Act passed by the Biden administration did was to raise the income level for the applicability of these Obamacare tax credits, which are not universally applicable. Many people would not see them anyways, even if the income brackets were raised. But what it essentially does is, what the plan did was extend the potential for these tax credits to go to higher income levels of, not like high income, like, $200,000 a year, but like say 60 to $70,000 a year. Working class people who may just have like a trade job or work in a factory or as a contractor in a contracting position or what have you. Um, it extended the applicability to them, but only through 2025. And so, with Trump's victory, especially given his priorities are to further inflate the military budget, to make immigrations, customs, and enforcement the size of the military of a smaller country, and to occupy with the National Guard entire cities across this country. Obviously, Trump has other priorities. So he's going to cut those tax credits to higher incomes. And the Democrats, what they're doing here is they're fighting over a half measure, something that really delays and pastes over single payer healthcare, which smaller and poorer countries already around the world already have. And they're not poorer because they have single payer healthcare. For many of these countries, they're poor because they lost their colonial empires in the 20th century. But the United States, unfortunately, is an empire that's desperately trying to keep its head above water. It lost in Vietnam, it lost in Afghanistan, and it's losing ground around the world today. And in this desperation, the bourgeoisie are fighting amongst themselves over how much they should give in concessions to working people versus how much should they inflate from our regressive taxes into their war maneuvers, into their corporate stimulus, their research and development. And for the Trump administration and the section of the bourgeoisie that he represents, they would give nothing. And for the Democrats and the section of the bourgeoisie that they represent, they would give us barely anything temporarily. And that is the real struggle. And the Democrats will pat themselves on the back even after they inevitably cave, and enough of them actually do support this bill in the Senate. But the Democrats will pat themselves on the back for fighting the good fight. When at the end they are supporting Newt Gingrich's health care plan, and they are supporting completely like non-universal and healthcare plans that still leave massive welfare cliffs, that still do not provide adequate services for people, and they will tout it into the midterms. They will tout it into the 2028 election, and we must not be deceived, because in 8 years from now, whatever half measure the Democrats are even capable of accomplishing in that time, that will be fought over as well. And when you fight over half measure, over half measure, over half measure, don't be surprised when you find you're moving backwards. And that's exactly where we are.
Yeah, it's not even
And
like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's just 2 steps back. We just keep going back. We're not actually going forward in any meaningful way. It's like they are fighting for crumbs for us. This isn't, and they're not even fighting for them. They're just trying to make concessions so that they can eventually have more crumbs or giant pieces for the bourgeois class. Like I'm saying this, I often hear liberals try to say, oh, well, when we liberalize the economy, we are making a bigger pie so that everyone can eat from it. And it's like, well, actually, those who actually have access to said pie aren't sharing it, and those of us who need it are getting the crumbs. This is crumb politics.
Right. Liberalizing the economy means sharpening the knife of the fat fingers that will seize the pie from the people who bake the pie, so that they are left with crumbs, and nine over 9/10 of the pie goes to those fat fingered hands with a sharper knife. That is the purpose of the Democratic and the Republican parties. They are the knife sharpeners. Okay,
Yeah.
they calculate and take the cost of dividing that pie. um like we've talked a lot about healthcare. um and if we were to look at SNAP too, now there was a lot of buzz and a lot of conversation going around about SNAP benefits being frozen on November 1st. Now thankfully a federal court did kind of see the blood in the water through this public outrage and through public demonstrations against the freezing of SNAP benefits, because millions of people would be put into positions of declining nutrition, would be put in positions of potential starvation by this freezing. And even with this federal court order, SNAP benefits are still being delayed, and they are only permissible at half of their usual balance. And even those balances, and this is very important, they in themselves, especially in the case of rising cost of living, rising inflation, are still insufficient to provide healthy, nutritious, consistent meals for lower income working class families. That's the thing. The vast majority of SNAP benefits are full-time workers, and then you get into part-time workers, and then you get into those who are children, those recipients who are children, who are disabled, and who are elderly. And these are people who do informal work, unless they're children. I mean, God knows there are enough Democrats and Republicans in this country that would welcome child labor back and are actively fighting for it in some states.
Do
But
not
for
manifest that.
disabled, no, this is true.
Yep.
In the Maine Republican Party, very famously, has tried to reverse certain statutes against child labor for certain industries.
Completely unsurprising.
Um, yes, but elderly and disabled people who shouldn't have to work, who are still being forced to work, at least part time or informally, are also working class people, and by and large, this is class war. And like regardless of anything, any fraud that exists within SNAP is absolutely insufficient in the face of the great fraud of billions and billions going to Blackwater and to Enron and to Pfizer and all these various energy and arms manufacturing and pharmaceutical and healthcare companies. Um, that really that don't provide services, that provide increasingly expensive services and aren't providing stable employment, and are increasingly outsourcing and increasingly automating their industries. This is an upwards redistribution of wealth. The great fraud that we should be worried about is the bailouts of the financial sector and the regressive taxes that feed the growing wealth of major monopolies in this country. Um, but to get back to SNAP again, if we're to talk about no benefits for the people that need them, for the working class people who absolutely need them to survive, or uh, keeping them, but they're increasingly meaningless. They're increasingly insufficient because of conditions like inflation and regressive taxation and growing debt, growing interest rates, and so on. This is a debate that shouldn't exist. A system that forces us to choose between rationing goods in the wealthiest country in the world over having increasingly like next to nothing is a system that doesn't deserve to exist.
Yeah, well,
uh
it reminds me, sorry,
Fundamentally.
sorry to jump in real fast. It reminds me of how, people are like in the Soviet Union, they had bread lines. And it's like to Americans, it's like they had bread lines. Like the state was at least trying to feed people, like actively. Like here in America, you're lucky if they want to actually feed you and it's not like a fight. in like the government to see if like people should eat or not, you know?
I've I've always found that interesting. Like so you've like every time you go to the all-American patriotic grocery store, there's no lines ever. There's no underworked cashier who's getting paid a percentage of what you get paid, who's struggling with no help to provide a valuable service for their community, and you don't have to wait an obscene amount of time to get those services. I mean, it's such a nothing argument. I mean, people will wait for the necessities that they need, and I think for a lot of these, these chronically online libertarians, the most frightening thing about bread lines is the prospect of going outside, um,
Get
especially to
them!
actually take care of themselves.
Get them! These people don't shower. Like, no, no, it's
But
true though.
uh,
Like it's people always talk about, well, the Soviet Union, you know, they had famines and they had this. So did the United States. What do you think the Great Depression was? What do y'all think that was?
mhm.
Like, yeah, go ahead,
The
comrade.
Soviet
Yeah.
Union, people like to talk about like collectivization and the Great Famine, and that the Soviets used famine as a weapon of war.
Oh
Uh,
God.
that famine, on top of its natural foundations, was exacerbated by the landlords, by the wealthy peasants.
The kulaks,
And
yeah.
yes, and those same kulaks that are wept over by especially the Ukrainian bourgeoisie today and much of liberal academia, were the very people who were poaching livestock, hoarding grain, and executing collectivist farmers. So I don't know why you're weeping for these mafiosos who didn't want to pay progressive taxes or to voluntarily join a farm that would also mean more food and less work for themselves. But the long-term consequences of collectivization was that the regular famines that occurred sporadically across what used to be the Russian Empire, they were completely eliminated because, God forbid, can you imagine it? When you get people to work together and you provide them with infrastructure to deliver their goods to urban centers and to have access to machinery and to fertilizers and to seeds, they're more productive. Can you imagine that? And when they're more
Whoa.
productive, they're producing more food. So you can't assign economic sabotage by wealthy parasites to communism, especially when that same maneuver eliminated a regular famine. And it's so infuriating that people still make that argument when bourgeois states like Israel actively use famine against the peoples and the classes that they're eliminating and repressing, like the Palestinian people, or the U.S. is using it today against Venezuela and against Cuba, and the U.S. is using it against its own people. It's not an accident that at the same
Or
time we're seeing historic protests against reformism, and particularly against the rise of fascism in this country, you're seeing the elimination of already meager benefits. If you're going to talk about the weaponization of hunger for political interests, you have to talk about the austerity in the United States.
absolutely, and also talking about like another example that comes to mind right now is the UAE and the famine in Sudan and just the rampant murder that the RSF is committing. Now, I'm not an expert on the situation, and I know that we would like at some point to do an episode on Sudan. We just need to do more research to make sure we're doing justice to the Sudanese people who deserve to have their stories told. Um, but the broad strokes here is that the UAE is also using famine and genocidal tactics to just kill people, kill Sudanese people, left, right, and center. And you know, as Comrade Red was saying, which is absolutely true, if we're going to talk about famine, quote unquote, being used as a weapon by governments like the Soviet Union, which isn't even true, they didn't do that. And in fact, moreover, as Comrade Red was saying, under Stalin, or not even under, because he wasn't a dictator, during his time as chairman of the party, they eliminated famines. And the only other famine that had happened after that was due to World War II and other external factors, which, of course, the Soviet Union was hit the hardest by World War II, by the Nazi onslaught. And so, or one of the countries that was hit the hardest, they lost millions of people. Beyond, I don't know the exact figure. Comrade Red might know. I'm not, but what I know is that it was nowhere near what the United States and Britain had gone through. And considering, I mean, the Soviet Union, I don't mean to glaze them or anything, but like,
Right. I mean, there's no Marxist-Leninist who should look uncritically at the Soviet Union, because
absolutely
we
not.
know that capitalism was imposed back into the Soviet Union before the Soviet Union even dissolved. So, like, we should not look uncritically at the USSR, and we don't, especially here in the APL. But conservatively, 20 million people lost their lives in the USSR during the Second World War. 20 million people.
That's
Those
insane.
kinds of losses are unimaginable in the United States. Americans, you mentioned glazing a second ago. Americans love to glaze themselves about our military prowess and our unbroken military record, which of course is not true. But Americans have never, ever fought a war that was as existential, that was as intense, that was as unexpected and as disastrous as even, well, of course, as the Second World War, where, the Americans spend money on their military budget today as if the Chinese are sailing up the Potomac. That's simply, it's simply ridiculous. Americans talk about national security, but they've never been threatened. The United States has
Hmm.
never been threatened in the same existential way as European states have been threatened just in the 20th century. Um, and I think, people like, obviously people were pretty, agitated by Trump renaming what was it, the Secretary of Defense to
Department
the
of Defense,
Secretary of
the
Department
Department
of
of
Defense. Yes.
War.
Yeah, that's just honest. It's the one honest thing Trump ever did, because the United States is not defending itself from anything. 9/11 was the exception that proves the rule. The United States trained and funded the people who flew the planes, or their predecessors, in the
Hmm.
Mujahideen of Afghanistan. And the United States paints a target on its back when it destabilizes regions, when it overthrows governments, and when it funds terrorist groups, as it's doing to this day, as American corporations are supporting the RSF in Sudan, as the United States is funneling billions of dollars into the genocidal project in Israel, as it has destabilized nations like Syria and Iraq and Pakistan and Afghanistan and Somalia. I could run out of breath. Um, and to this day, it is threatening war against Venezuela, for exaggerations and imaginations about fighting the war on drugs, as they senselessly slaughter fishermen,
Yeah,
um,
I was about to
off the
say.
coast of Venezuela.
Yeah.
Um, so, so America doesn't have a defense policy; it has a war policy, and these are the priorities of the Trump administration. And I just want to get, this is tangential. I'm sorry, but
Yeah. You're good, comrade. Continue.
I just I like if Trump needs to carve out as much funds from the crumbs of Medicaid and Obamacare, or Reagan Care tax credits, um, to fund domestic occupation and arms sales to Saudi Arabia and to Israel and to Ukraine, and to keep the U.S. Navy off the coast of Cuba and Venezuela. If America wants to do this, I think it's well past time that the middle class, petty bourgeois bootlickers of the Trump administration admit that he is not the peace president. You cannot be a peace president and fund and condone and support genocide in Sudan and Palestine and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and across the world, and bring us to the brink of war with Iran and the DPRK and with Venezuela. You cannot be a peace president and domestically occupy your own cities, um, and support regime change in countries like, historically, like Bolivia and in
Mm,
Venezuela,
yep.
several attempts. And yeah, like this is not peace. Genocide and economic slavery, and funding and training and agitating war is not peace in this in the least.
Not at all. And
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
sad. No. It's sad that Americans are under this impression that somehow we're this, like, this leader of the free world, when in fact it is the exact opposite. And I would make the argument that the USSR, prior to the fall of Khrushchev, especially during the Stalin and Lenin eras, were the leaders of the free world, in showing that, like, you can do, you can change your conditions, that communism and socialism are possible. And were they perfect? Absolutely not. But they have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that, these things are possible to implement, and scientific socialism is a system that works. And yeah, you want to jump in on that, Comrade?
Well, like, just to get into that a little bit, like with the 1930s in the USSR, France and Britain and the United States abandoned even the bourgeois government of Spain, in which working class people had a lot of activity and a lot of mobilization under. They were abandoned and really blockaded during the Civil War, while other capitalist states like Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy and even the Holy See, the Catholic Church, were funding and supporting the fascist Falangist movement in Spain. The USSR was one of few, of like one or two countries in the world that logistically and organizationally supported the Spanish Republic in their fight against fascism. Um, and a brutal fascist dictatorship eventually won out, under internal divisions and this external, really, isolation of Spain. And with directly, like, denoting fascism in Germany. When they annexed Czechoslovakia, the USSR proposed sending troops through Poland to support the Czechoslovakians against the German invasion. And Britain and Poland said, if you move troops through Poland to support the Czechoslovaks, we will declare war against you. Um, and there's a quote from a book I really like, and it's like, you try to be reasonable, it's only right, but some things have just got to be ended, and you've got to end it. Like, you may have to struggle at times, you may have to defend yourself at times, but if you are prevented from, cutting out a tumor when it's in its infancy, it will metastasize and it will kill the whole organism. And capitalism is very much a system that is dependent upon the metastasis of war. It is not a system that extols and justifies and defends defensive wars, but its lifeblood is offensive wars, are coups, are genocides. Um, and like that, I think this is something that American workers must realize, that if we are losing even these meager benefits and things like Section 8 and environment education grants and environmentalism, healthcare and nutrition benefits, if we're losing even these things, it is going towards supporting and funding a war, or wars across the world, that will be even more destructive, even more unnecessary, and even more catastrophic. No one builds the largest military in the world just for sad little pathetic parades on the birthday of the dictator that helped to make it so. Okay. People build the largest militaries in the history of the world with the intent to use them. And the US has, is, and will use them as it sees fit to protect the interests of monopoly imperialist capital.
Absolutely, and it's important for American workers to finally begin to truly understand this, and to understand, why we are so opposed to reformism as the only avenue of change. Capitalism will never allow for those things to happen. Something that an event that comes to mind is the overthrowing of Allende in Chile, who was a democratically elected, I believe he was socialist, or at least socialist adjacent, and he did a lot of nationalization, a lot of reform, and was brutally overthrown, brutally. and I believe it was backed by the CIA. You know, capital can never actually allow these things to happen, because once it becomes obvious that there is a superior system, that of socialism, that can not only exist but overtake in its productive forces and in its ability to lift people out of poverty, to raise things like the literacy rate, to bring much needed benefits like healthcare, and so on and so forth to the general population. Capitalism goes into crisis and it realizes, oh, you know, this, as you said, comrade, this giant military that they have been building isn't just for it isn't just for kicks. It's because it is for situations like this. It is for situations uh, it is for situations in which they must ensure that capital and capitalism at large are is that mode of production. You know, that capitalism is the prevailing mode of production, and it needs to be done violently because they realize that there is no popular mandate for capitalism amongst the working people.
Absolutely, and there are two things there in the sense that like the supporters of Trumpism today will point to the fact that Trump won the popular vote in 2024, um, in an election in which just above 60% of the population actually voted. And about half of the percentage of that percentage of people who did vote voted against Trump. So realistically, there's just above 25 to 30% or in that range of people that actually support the Trump regime in the United States, or have at least supported it enough to actively support it. And so that there is no mandate for Trumpism in this country. There is a faulty and undemocratic, process in this country and institutions in this country. But there is no popular mandate for any capitalist regime around the world, simply because it becomes too expensive and bureaucratic and difficult, increasingly so, for people who are working more and more and living off of less and less to actually get out there and vote and to educate themselves about various campaigns and candidates. There is no democracy in capitalism. And in the case of, and like, if we're just returning to the, this whole dispute about, uh, you know, the government shutdown, the Democrats could never portray themselves as a genuine opposition because they cannot even, and it has not sufficiently been, extolled that they are supportive of reversing all of Trump's austerity, that they do not support increased military spending, they do not support increased ICE spending, they do not support the domestic genocide that is being carried out around against black and brown uh, immigrants and various definitions of citizens in the United States as well. They cannot purport this because even in terms of immigration, they supported a Republican immigration plan, and Trump shot it down simply because he wanted the political credit for campaigning off of it himself in 2024. This was a man who wasn't even elected, who can spur Republicans in Congress to vote down against their own immigration plan so that Trump can install it himself. What opposition is this? What identity do the Democrats have, except for supporting a slightly less worse or slightly more delayed version of Trumpism? This is part of the reason why just above 60% of the people in the United States voted in the 2024 elections, and it's also why the Democrats could not obtain even the popular victory, because we know the popular victory does not matter in the United States. They couldn't even obtain the popular victory over a president who lost it twice before. It's pathetic. And I think it really does expose that people are beginning to wake up that the Democrats are no real solution and that the best they can do is to shut down the government. And not even that. They've offered so much up to the Republicans. The Republicans are continuing the shutdown of the government. But this is the best that the Democrats can do. And I think that on top of the failures of Biden and Harris and all the reversals of the Obama administration, the lack of opposition of the Democrats, because we all know they caved when it came to opposing the Doge cuts in March of 2025, they will cave here too. And when they do, listeners to Americans more broadly must come to the realization that reform or the promise of reform will not save us. It is simply the delay and the gradual implementation of the same reactionary politics that are killing us, that are increasing our poverty and our destitution and pose an existential threat to all of humanity. So it is absolutely unacceptable to continue keeping our faith in the Democrats, and we have to use whatever tool exists in our arsenal off of the few concessions that we have at this moment, like freedom of speech or freedom of assembly, to build up the movement that can establish a genuinely democratic social order in which exploitation and poverty and war and genocide and inequality is an absolute impossibility.
No, absolutely. And I think that like this is why joining a revolutionary party and moving into revolutionary politics is the answer. This isn't to say that we can't support or uphold certain reformist ideas that pop up here and there. We talked about Mamdani and the fact that overall I support the Mamdani campaign and I support Mamdani as the mayor for New York, not because of who he is as a person. We don't know who he is as a person. We don't actually know Mamdani. We do know that Mamdani supports, albeit populist, but still important reforms that can show Americans who are disillusioned but not totally sure what to do about things that we can make steps forward, but ultimately that folks like Mamdani are going to have to cave and already have caved to certain democratic positions that frankly, I don't know if he actually agrees with. I don't really care because he still caved to them anyway, which has shown that, once again, throwing all of your support behind one person who appeals to you emotionally and appeals to you, logically and everything. We can support the policy while also understanding that Mamdani is a human being, and he's going to make mistakes, and we have to hold him accountable, even if it sucks. And I say all of that to say that the Democrats at large have proven time and time again that they are not actually that they are not a party for working people. They have said very openly that they are a bourgeois party. Mamdani actively courted and got the nomination as the Democratic candidate. That is not nothing. That is something that we should be looking at skeptically. Would you want to comment on that, Comrade?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say that, and we've said this before, that the real value of an AOC or a Bernie Sanders or a Mamdani is that it does get people more optimistic and more motivated to address very important social issues like unionization and housing and healthcare and broader social and political issues. Like I think it is very valuable that Mamdani. I think it's ridiculous that the mayor of New York has to have a foreign policy about Israel.
That's
But
insane. That's just
yeah,
racism.
yeah, that's where we are with that. And Mamdani in all the ways that he's caved in recognizing a genocidal and colonial state like Israel, he is advancing a general recognition politically that the American worker, the American oppressed person is not aligned with imperialism, with genocide, and with war. And we need to really build up that cultural consciousness and that optimistic energy to go even further. When we are critical or even where we oppose even earnest social democrats, it's not because we hate them. It's not because we don't want things to change. It's not because we're, as the Trotskyists will, support the overthrow of an Allende, or of a Maduro or a Chavez. We make these criticisms and we have this opposition because we know it will fail, because we know that humanity does not exist in a dehumanizing system, and in a dehumanizing party that keeps it alive. So we as human beings cannot find our faith in such a barbaric and inhumane system. And we have to really seize upon the energy and the optimism and the building education and culture that comes with a Mamdani to build up a realization of the necessity of revolution.
Yeah, I mean, before the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks, in some ways, had to just go along with the bourgeois government at the time that was installed when the Tsar was deposed, because they realized they still needed to build certain political power in order to make that happen. Now, granted, of course, they actually did follow through with the revolution, and it was very successful. But even they had to, enact the NEP, and had to, they have to do maneuvering in order to ensure that socialism actually survives. And it's why we're not going to take the Trotskyist position of it's all or nothing, or the anarchist position of it's all or nothing. We have to work within the realities of the movement, and realizing that there are certain positions that there are certain powers we just don't have right now. Part of the reason I'm so critical, intensely critical of the Democrats, especially during this government shutdown, is this is like one of the first times they're actually doing anything to fight back. They could have been from day one since Trump got elected in November. Even before that, we should have been holding them to this standard. We could have the Democrats in the House and in the Senate, sorry, my cat's on the desk, could have absolutely been dragging their feet, doing everything they possibly could to oppose the Republicans and their genocidal onslaught, frankly, of just American working people. But they didn't. They could have opposed all of Trump's cabinet picks. They could have made it intensely hard. There are so many things that they could do, that they have the levers of power to be able to do, but they won't, because they are funded by the same corporations. They are funded by the same rich elites. Because once again, this is a bourgeois party. They have said it time and time again. They are never actually going to fight for real working class policy that is going to advance the power of the working class, because it is not in their best interest. And it's time for Americans to truly see this, and not only see it, but act on what we need to do to depose this power. Because if they can barely even fight in a government shutdown over whether Americans should have some kind of piss poor medical benefits, and they can't even fight for like single payer health care, why they aren't going to fight for anything radical. Like they're not actually fighting for working people. All of these it's true that when we look at you know even left Democratic politicians, they go into Congress sometimes as normal people, and they come out as millionaires. This is not for nothing. This is not like oh, well, I wonder why that happened. This must be so disconnected from every other reality. No. This is because they are paid by the same corporate benefactors. Don't get it twisted. And this government shutdown, while they're fighting for the meager crumbs of what working people need, they will not actually fight for the bigger, more consequential policy that could actually change our lives for the better collectively.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment that, we literally know this is public information that the same lobbyists and the same super PACs funded both Harris and Trump. A government election, a presidential election, is really just a horse race, where billionaires and hedge funds literally hedge their bets around which horse will get ahead. And the Democrats, they had every opportunity to actually talk about some of the things that, in their own minor, almost meaningless way, did address the material needs of working class people. They didn't address those things. They couldn't address them because partially a lot of the economic policy otherwise was against working class people. Biden would hail himself as the most pro-union administration since FDR, when FDR wasn't even that pro-union.
That's a piss poor.
Um,
That sucks. That's nothing. That is absolute. Sorry.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's true. Especially because, like, the funding shortcomings of the Biden administration, the crumbling infrastructure, and if nothing else, the increased arms exports to Israel and Ukraine and South Korea, they instigated a general strike, or not a general strike, but a strike amongst longshoremen just a month before the election, and at the very same time. And of course, we know that's due to, crumbling infrastructure, inadequate pay, and inadequate technology, and over demand, especially for unnecessary things like war. But at the same time, in the state of this crumbling infrastructure, when railway workers wanted to go on strike, Biden crushed that attempt. He killed that strike in the crib. So it's ridiculous for Biden to call himself the most pro-union president in American history, or since FDR. But the Democrats purposefully did not address many of the few accomplishments that they did make towards the working class in the United States, because they were appealing to the middle classes, to the landlords, to the petty bourgeoisie, to the contractors. They wanted to do this to try and outflank the Republicans in certain respects on the right. And this is a foolish strategy, if you take it at face value, because the middle classes increasingly do not represent a significant number of people in this country, but also um, they are making themselves indistinguishable from the other party. And we don't have to take it at face value. We don't have to try and accept them as an alternative to the Republicans, because these are simply two factions of the same political party of the American capitalist class.
Yeah, no, I think it's really funny when I think back to the Harris campaign and the fact that they were trying to do more republicanism than the actual Republicans in some cases, and I'm just like, what game are you playing right now? This makes no sense, because it's like it I talked about this with Keegan when we did our episode on Kamala Harris more specifically in her campaign, but it's just interesting that, actually today is on time of recording, it is November 4th. This morning the news broke that Dick Cheney has passed away. Rest in peace, you won't be missed, war criminal. Terrible human being, architect of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, rabid imperialist and CEO of Halliburton. Terrible human being all around. Glad he's gone. But anyway, he. What was I saying about Dick Cheney? Oh yeah, the Kamala Harris campaign actively courted and got his endorsement, which is so weird, considering that he's a Republican. Um, why would they do that? And it's like, well, actually, we know why. Because they have the same politics. There's no difference. Kamala Harris has many times tried to retrofit herself to be more left or more right, depending on what she thinks or what her campaign thinks that the American people want to see. When in reality, it's always been she's always been a right wing candidate. And it's been like that with the Democrats for years. I think about Josh Shapiro. I think about Gavin Newsom. I think about Pritzker to an extent. He's definitely, Pritzker is a billionaire. We have all of these people who market themselves as being these quote unquote woke people, but when push comes to shove, they push the same capitalist agenda, because once again, this is a bourgeois party.
Right. It is really ridiculous to even call the Democratic Party a Democratic Party, because, we can go back into the terms of the government shutdown and how they're fighting over, again, the right-wing healthcare plan from the 1990s, which is, even single-payer healthcare is insufficient because of the threats of government austerity, which is very much in fashion right now towards the few tax credits and subsidies that we barely have, that are increasingly meaningless in the face of inflation and regressive taxation, but I digress. But the majority of Americans support single payer health care, and the Democrats do not. So, how can you consider yourself a Democratic Party, even in a vulgar sense, when you don't support what is democratically favored? The majority of Americans support reproductive rights, and they support transgender rights to identity and to existence. And the Harris administration campaign in 2024, around the same time, they balked at championing. They literally said it's not a priority to address reproductive rights and transgender rights. I mean, who's surprised coming from Kamala Harris, who sent a trans woman to a men's prison when she was a state's attorney in California? You know, no one should be surprised at that. But the Democrats specifically turn away from what is popularly supported. Number one, so that they can court the more conservative and reactionary middle classes in this country. But number two, so they don't have to support anything that might take away from funding their corporate donors and bailouts and stimulus, research and development, and just general contracting. So they don't have to. They aren't pressured to raise taxes in the least that might affect those same corporations that are their donors. So, because supporting things like gender affirming care or reproductive rights would cost money. And even if we had regressive taxation, which we should not have taxation at all, it begets an income system based on wage exploitation. But even if we had just regressive taxation, I would be more than happy that my taxes went towards healthcare, reproductive rights, to gender affirming care, and to nutrition benefits, as would the majority of Americans. But the Democratic Party cannot support even single payer health care or adequately supported Medicaid and nutrition benefits. So they have no right calling themselves a Democratic Party. They have no right considering themselves as an opposition when they cave every single time and try to outflank the Republicans on their own bullshit. And they should not be surprised when they continue to lose elections, as they should be accustomed to doing so by now. And they should not be surprised when more and more Americans abandon their pathetic excuse of reform and of inclusivity and equality for an ideology and a movement that will actually build inclusivity and equality and justice.
No, exactly. And as we come to the end of this segment, I think it's important to note that as we discuss this government shutdown, and part of the reason we've even talked about the Democrats at all, is because we need to understand that this government shutdown is a symptom of something larger, which is that Republicans and Democrats are in bed with each other on these kinds of things. They can fight in public, on the cameras and act as though they are in opposition, but in reality, they are not. This is a quibble amongst bourgeois elected candidates in a bourgeois democracy. This is not representative of what working class Americans want or even need. And it is absolutely imperative that we understand that reform, while can be a necessary part of our larger class struggle, cannot be the only part of class struggle, because it is not actually class struggle when you are only trying to reform the capitalist system that ultimately wants to suppress and oppress workers. We still need to keep our revolutionary optimism. We need to work towards a workers' revolution and the installment of socialism. And this means opposing both the Democrats and Republicans as viable parties to actually back in that. This is why both Red and I are. I am a candidate, Red is cadre of the American Party of Labor. We are both members because this is a working class radical communist party. And whether it's the APL or the DSA or even PSL, whatever party you choose to join or affiliate yourself with, dear listener, understand that if it is the Democratic Party, you are sorely mistaken. And please reconsider, as we see that they are not here for you. They are here for the bourgeois class. And if you are a rich person listening to this, why are you here? Go join a revolutionary movement. But thank you so much, Red. This was an amazing conversation.
I agree, and thank you for having me here. I just wanted to just briefly touch on that. A lot of the things that are imperiled right now with the government shutdown, like things like foreign aid, when we're facing things like genocide across the world, is a form of social murder, a form of class war, and it is an expression of imperialism. It will intensify the crises of genocide and migrant immigration crises and war in the future. And we cannot forgive either the Democrats or the Republicans for creating these conditions. And we also should not permit a president like Trump to try to centralize economic authority around himself, who does not have a popular mandate, who is a failed billionaire businessman with so many endowments and inheritances from his daddy.
He's
Um,
a fail son.
who Yeah, exactly. He has not shown to have the integrity or the competency to have this massive uh, executive power over the economy. And we really should be concerned about this centralization that is a building block for an openly fascist state in our country. And I think that this should not terrorize us into into like it should not stupefy us into inaction. I agree with Felicity, comrade, that we should instead use this fear and use this realization to build a revolutionary movement that excludes the possibility of a petulant tyrant like Trump, or of fostering genocide and war around the globe, and from social murder and destitution at home. And I think that's very imperative that we keep up our optimism, that we continue the struggle, because nothing will change unless we act. And I believe that people are acting, and it has to continue, it has to go further, and that's where we'll get real change. So thank you, comrade, for having me here. And I know that I'll see you out there on the streets. I'll be there too. And let's just keep fighting and fight the good fight.
Absolutely, yes. That was a great way to end it, Red. Folks, Comrade Red, once again, please check out APL Maryland Division if you are living in Maryland and a listener. Please check out their Instagram page, check out the APL online website. And if you're interested in joining, definitely reach out. And, the organization is more than happy to talk to folks who want to organize. But once again, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop.